useful information without having to spam the chat. Okay, so llsetText is only one of about 400 different useful functions, and again, you can find out about those functions right here. It would take me days or weeks to go over every one of them, but just for now, I'll give you the catalog of them, and if you ever have any questions on what any of them do, I've used just about every one of them by now, so I probably will be able to help you. So just ask me a question. I'll be able to help you about how the different functions work. Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to learn is how to use a user-defined function. Okay, and a user-defined function is something like you would find in C and C++ as an actual function. So they're different from the LL functions in that they're not built in. Okay, so we have to make them inside of our script. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a built-in function that helps us change the box from on to off, and also tells us the position of the box. Okay, because remember, if you took the building tutorial, every object has a position on the region in X, Y, and Z, and so we can actually find very precise coordinates of the box's center. Okay. Now all user-defined functions must go at the beginning of the program. Okay, so go to line 0 and go to the left of the word default and hit enter twice. So you have a blank line 0 and default should be down to 2 now. Okay, so after you have that, we're going to make a global variable. Okay, and what a global variable in Linden scripting language is a variable that works in any state, in any function, in any event. Okay, so just like remember how before when we moved down the on state, how nothing inside of the default state worked anymore? All these variables like the first num, second num, and answer, we couldn't use those because those are local variables. That means they only last in between the braces here. Okay, but if you make a global variable up at the top here, it'll be useful throughout the entire program. Okay, so go back to line 0 and write the words string state checker and then hit semicolon. Okay, so what this is going to do is this is going to hold a string value that either says on or off depending on what state it's in. Okay, so we can go down the on state here, and in the state entry you can hit a line after your llsetText after the last semicolon and write state checker is equal to on. Whoops. Okay, and then copy and paste that in your on state or your off state the same way, but change the word to off. Whoops. Okay, so what that does is now we can have the same variable in two different states. Okay, and that could be useful for what we're going to do here. Okay, so now even though we have a way of telling what state it's in, regardless of what state it's actually in, we don't have a function to do that for us, to tell us. Okay, even though we could, print it out here if we wanted to in our llsetText, that would be very useful to teach you how to use user-defined function. Okay, so to do that, go to the right of your semicolon here and hit enter twice. Okay, so it's always useful to have the variables above your user-defined function, no matter how you have them. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to call this function. And if you're not sure how to use a function or how to make a function in C, C++, or Java, again, send me an email, let me know, and I'll help you guys out. Okay. Anyways, we're going to make this a void function. Okay. Now, if you're used to C and C++ and Java, you actually have to write the word void and yada yada yada, right? But in LSL, a void function simply just has the name of the function here. Okay. And so what we're going to call this function is we'll call this state react. So that way it'll tell us what state it's in. Okay, so you write the variable name and followed by two opening and closing parentheses. Okay, have a brace and a closing brace. Okay, so it should have the name, the two parentheses, and opening and a closing brace. Okay, so in between these two braces, we're going to do some stuff that lets us know whether or not state checker is on or off. Okay, and it's going to tell us on the box, and it's also, when the box is on, it's going to tell us the position. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is we already have the state checker being changed, right? However, we don't have it being printed out up here. Okay. But since it could be either one of two things, since we'll be using it with both states, we need to make sure that it can differentiate between the two. Okay. So to do that, we're going to use what's called an if statement. I should write that, if statement. Okay. And if you're unsure what an if statement is, an if statement is something that checks a statement inside of your program and checks whether or not it's true. If it's true, anything inside of the if statement will activate. If it's not true, you will either have to use an else part of it, which I'll explain what an else is, or you will have to have nothing happen at all. Okay, so to use an if statement, write the words if, okay, open parentheses, and in this case we're going to write the variable name we use, so state checker, okay, two equal signs, and then open parentheses, open quotes, sorry, open quotes on, close quote, semicolon, or not semicolon, sorry, closing parentheses, okay, then hit enter, and then hit a opening parenthesis, quote, bracket, and a closing bracket. I'm using too many different things here. Anyways, so what's going to happen is this statement's going to check and see if state checker is equal to on. Okay. Now remember, when we come in down to here, state checker does equal on while we're in the on state. However, when we're in the off state, state checker is equal to off. Okay. So remember, an if statement only activates when that statement is true. Okay, so if we're in the on state, the statement will be true, but if we're in the off state, it will not be true. Okay, so it will not activate. Okay, so we need to use what's called an else statement. Okay, so after the closing bracket of your if statement, write the word else, hit enter, and make another opening and closing bracket. Okay, so if the statement inside of these parentheses here is true, the lines here will activate. However, if it's not true, the lines here will activate. Okay, so we're checking if the state is on, right? So we were in the on state, all right? So what we need to do is we need to copy and paste the LL set text in your on state. So go down to your on state and then copy your LL set text. And then paste it inside of your bracket in the first part of the if statement. Okay. However, if it's off, we want it, it's not going to come up in here, right? It's going to come in the else statement. Okay, so go down to your off state, and copy and paste that into the second part of your if statement. Okay, so if we come into this function and we've come from the on state, it will tell us on the box that this box is on. And if we come from the off state, the if statement will not be true. It will come to the else part, and it will say this box is off. Okay, but I promised I'd show you guys how to use another LL function that tells us our position. Okay, and that function is called LL get pause. Okay, and what this function does is it gives us a variable to tell us where the where the box is. Okay, and it uses what's called a vector variable. Okay, a vector variable contains three numbers, so something like this, just like we used before in the set text. Okay, so it contains an x, y, and Z number. Okay, so just like in our box, how it has a X, Y, and Z position, we're also going to have an X, Y, and Z position in our vector, X, Y, and Z. And so it's going to tell us in our box here whether or not, or where the box is. Okay, so go up into here. Okay, and if you